Alien Factory presents the Fantom programming language with master coder Steve Einen.
Hello, and welcome to an introduction to the Xored F4 IDE for the Fantom programming language. In this video, we're going to download and install F4, create an example project, and run a Hello World program. I'll also explain a bit about pod files and debugging, all the while giving tips and pointing out little details you may not know about. The F4 IDE is based on the ever-popular Eclipse platform that many of you will know for its Java IDE. F4 was initially created by the Russian company Xored, but the entire project is open source and freely available on GitHub. My own interest in F4 is that I use it pretty much every day for Fantom coding, so much so that I decided to roll up my sleeves and contribute to the F4 source code, which is pretty much all Fantom code itself. I was pretty much solely responsible for the 1.1 update that fixed a plethora of bugs and annoyances, introduced pluggable environments for finding pods, and updated the runtime to Fantom 1069. So let's take a closer look. To install, we're going to navigate to the Xored website and click F4. Completion, debugging, search and navigation all sounds good to me. Let's download. But it's annoying that they collect email addresses, but to be honest, I've never received an email from them, but maybe Mickey Mouse at Disney.com has, if you get my drift. Well, F4 is a big zip file and about 155 megabytes, so it may take a minute or two to download. Installation is as easy as unzipping it. I'm going to put it in my apps directory. Note that F4 needs Java to be installed, but make sure that your Java installation is at least Java 8. Also, note that F4 comes with a copy of Fantom. This means that you do not need to download or install Fantom to use F4, which makes things easy. Now to run F4, just double click the .exe. A quick note, this F4 INI file holds all the startup parameters, so if you need to mess with the way F4 starts, maybe give it more memory or specify which installation of Java it should use, then you need to edit this file. But be careful about what and how you change though, because the options and the formatting need to be precise, and you could end up causing more problems than you solve. To find out more about this file, Google eclipse.ini and not f4.ini. In fact, that is a general tip when doing web searches on F4. Because F4 runs on the Eclipse platform, replace the word F4 with the word Eclipse, and more often than not, you'll find what you're looking for. But in this video, I'm not going to touch the INI file at all, I'm just going to leave it as is. So, double click f4.exe. The first time you run F4, it will ask you where you want your workspace. Now, the workspace is just a directory where F4 keeps your projects. Projects don't have to be kept in the workspace, mind, but it's often handy. It also creates a .metadata directory inside the workspace, and that is where all your settings, preferences, and dialog histories are stored. In effect, if you delete that .metadata directory, you revert back to a clean install of F4. Now for us, we're just going to choose, say, a .projects directory. And this is F4. This central area here is where file editors are opened, and these tabs around the outside are called views. There is the Fantom Explorer, which is a tree view of your projects and their directories. There are problems. This shows Fantom compilation errors and warnings. The tasks view shows all the to-dos and fix-me's. Console view shows the output of programs you run. And the error log. This is for internal F4 errors and isn't much use to the average developer, so I usually close this one. There's the outline view. Well, that's pretty boring and it just shows the fields and methods of the class I'm working on, so I usually close this view too. But if you want to get any view back after you've closed it, then go to Window, Show View. If you click Other, you then get a list of all the views available. I'm just going to open up the Unit Test view, which shows the results of tests I've run. Now views may be dragged and docked to various places on the screen. For instance, I like my test results to be placed over here. Now the arrangement of views and their docked location is called a perspective. The perspective changes depending on what you're doing. For example, There's a dedicated perspective for debugging code, and a dedicated perspective for syncing code via Subversion, Mercurial, Git, whatever. Now most of your time is spent in this here Fantom perspective. So let's create a Fantom project. Right click in the Fantom Explorer view, select New, Project, and choose Fantom Project. Lots of options here, but we're just going to keep it simple and give a name of Hello World. And here's our project. Now, let's go back to our File Explorer and see what's actually being created in our workspace. First, there's our Hello World project directory, and inside, there's a fan directory that will hold all our source code. There's a build.fan script that builds our Fantom pod, and there are 3 F4 specific hidden files. You shouldn't ever need to edit these files directly, but I'll show you them just to prove that they're not that scary. So here's .build path. It's obviously XML and tells F4 to look in the fan directory for source code. .class path is similar and tells F4 where it can find binary files. Now .project is a little more interesting and it holds our project name, Hello World. But let's go back to F4. Oh, what's this? We have a warning, and it tells us we have no source code. Let's fix this and create a Fantom class. I right click on the fan folder and choose New Fantom class. Again, lots of options, but all we need is a class name, and we'll call it main. Now we have source code. Note that the last warning has disappeared. We'll create a main method here that echoes to standard out. Hello World. If I right click on the editor and click Run as Fantom class, we should see Hello World appear in the console. Now here I should explain that F4 is designed for creating Fantom projects, that is, multiple source codes that are compiled into a single pod file. This is different to a Fantom script, which is a single source file run on its own without context. I say this because when I just ran the Fantom main class, I didn't execute the file, no. F4 compiled all my source code into a .pod file, and then ran a command against that .pod file. So where did that pod file come from? Every Fantom project needs a build.fan. It is a single file Fantom script that compiles your Fantom code and creates a pod file. This build pod class that we extend does most of the work. All we have to do is configure it. Our pod is called Hello World. Now pod names should only contain alphanumeric characters and are simple one-word affairs. But you can use camel casing, and ideally should be qualified with an abbreviation of your organization or brand. So given I am Alien Factory, I'll prefix Hello World with AF. Note the convention is to start with a lowercase letter. Metadata is optional, so I could delete it. Although note proj.name is actually wrong and should really be pod.dis, dis being short for display. F4 lets you edit this file like any other, except for the source dirs field. Here it correctly says that our source code is held in the fan directory. If we try to change this to say Fantom stuff, then when we save the file, F4 just reverts it back. And if I were to create another subdirectory for code, you'll see that F4 adds it in for us. So, just where is this pod file then? If I go to Window Preferences, you'll see all the settings for F4, and under Fantom Compiler, it tells me that my pods are compiled into a bin directory. If we wanted to change this, we could change it for all the projects here. Or, if we look at the project-specific preferences, we'll see a subset of the global preferences that we can just change for the project. F4 hides the build directory, but if we use a file explorer, we can see the AF Hello World pod. Note that pod files are just zip files, and we can open them up as such. A handy advantage of pod files is that they can optionally contain the source code that they were built with. And that's also a nice feature of Fantom. It's very neat and tidy. When you build a project, it produces a single artifact the pod file. Not like some Node.js projects I've worked on, where like 13 source files end up creating some 43,184 files in the build directory. Well, I'm just going to delete these pod files for now for demonstration purposes. Let's go back to F4 and write some nonsense in the code, and we'll see how F4 copes with errors. Nothing really happens until I save the file. Saving the file kicks off the compiler and errors are reported in the problems view. Now because there's a problem, F4 cannot compile the source code and it cannot build the pod. If we go back to the bin directory, we will see that it is still empty. But if we resolve the problem and save the file, then we'll see the pod file reappear. What all this means is that you cannot run your code until all the problems are resolved. This is important to understand, otherwise it can lead to some confusion. Let's say I alter the program so that Fanny says something else, and I introduce an error at the same time. The new code has not yet compiled, so the pod file still contains the old message. Now if I try to run the program regardless, then F4 kindly tells me, "The following projects contain errors and have not been built. Hello world. Old pod versions will be used until errors are resolved." Now, if I click yes, then as expected, the old message still gets printed. But if I resolve the errors and rerun, then I see the new message. Fantastic! Here's a tip. If you want to see the standard output from the compiler, then go to the console view, click the Open Console icon and select Fantom Build Console. And here you'll see all the output from the compiler, which can be very useful if you ever get stuck and want to go old school. The cool thing about F4 is that it also comes with a debugger, so we can pause the Fantom program and inspect what's going on. But before we do that, let's update the program to take some arguments. If we run it, we see null. Not great. When we first ran the program, F4 created a run configuration for it and listed it in the run menu. Here it is under main.fan. We can click this to rerun our program, but we're going to edit the configuration. There are different types of configurations for running tests or Java applications, but ours comes under the badly named Fantom scripts. We're going to click the Arguments tab and enter Fantom Rocks. Notice I've surrounded it in double quotes because it's a single argument. Now if I'm to run the configuration, we can see the argument has indeed been picked up. To see the debugger in action, we're going to set a breakpoint on the echo line. Do this by double clicking in the margin and a little blue dot should appear. If we were to double click the same spot again, the breakpoint and blue dot would disappear. This time we're going to go to the debug icon and run our main class. When F4 hits the breakpoint, it asks us if we want to switch to the debug perspective. If we click yes, then it rearranges our workbench with specialized debug views, and this corner icon here tells us we're in the debug perspective. This is the current stack trace of our suspended thread, and this is the code that we've broken on. And these are the variables in scope. The standard step in, step over and step out buttons are here, but we're just going to click run and complete the program. To get back to the standard Fantom perspective that we all know and love, just click the F4 icon here. I'll debug the program again because I want to point out that sometimes this variables view will say internal error, got error code in reply, 35 occurred while retrieving value. Don't panic, relax. It's just a weird bug with the underlying Java 8. If you simply tab out and tab back in again, all the variables will reappear as if nothing had happened. If you use an older version of Java, like Java 6, then you should never see this error message anyway. And that concludes my introduction to the F4 IDE. I've shown how to download and install F4, create a sample project with a simple Hello World program. I've explained a bit about pod files and shown how compilation affects their generation. And I've shown how to debug a Fantom application with different run configurations. Hopefully now, you'll be able to try some Fantom programming of your own and have some fun. I am Steve Einen, and this has been an introduction to the F4 IDE. Thank you and good night.